He came to fix her lights, a routine job in a quiet town. But when Mira's hand brushed his, whispering, "Wait," the air shifted with forbidden weight. What she'd say next would haunt him long after the night ended. I never imagined that a routine call to fix some flickering lights would unravel my carefully balanced life in ways I couldn't foresee. At 23, I was Harlan Voss, still navigating the edges of adulthood in the sleepy town of Harlow, Oregon, where the days blurred into one another like the misty mornings along the river. I'd relocated here after scraping through college, taking up an apprenticeship at Harbor Wiring Solutions, a modest shop squeezed between a hardware store and a diner on the corner of Redwood Boulevard and 5th Street. The work was straightforward: troubleshooting outlets in drafty old homes, climbing ladders to install fixtures under sagging ceilings. But it gave me a sense of purpose, a foothold in a world that felt vast and unforgiving. Harlow itself was a patchwork of quiet neighborhoods, with streets like Birchwood Drive winding past weathered houses and the occasional park bench overlooking the sluggish flow of the Willamette River. My apartment in Willow Crest Apartments was basic: thin walls that carried neighbors' arguments, a kitchenette with a stove that hummed unevenly, and a single window framing the distant hills that always seemed shrouded in fog. That particular late spring afternoon, the sky hung heavy with the promise of rain, the air thick with the scent of blooming lilacs from nearby yards. I'd wrapped up a grueling job rewiring an ancient barn on the town's outskirts, my hands aching from twisting copper wires and my shirt clinging with sweat. As I loaded my tools into my beat-up Ford F-150, my phone vibrated against the dashboard. It was Mr. Ellis, my boss, his voice gruff over the line. "Harlan, emergency over on Elmwood Lane. Mira Kendrick's kitchen lights are acting up. Flickering bad, she thinks it might spark a fire. Swing by before you head home. She's a lone widow. Treat her right." I exhaled slowly, wiping grime from my forehead. Exhaustion tugged at me, but turning down overtime wasn't an option, not when I was saving for my own van to go independent. Mira Kendrick. I'd heard whispers about her in the shop's break room. Widow of Tom Kendrick, the local mechanic who'd dropped dead from a heart attack 2 years back. She ran a small online jewelry business from home, kept mostly to herself. Folks said she was in her late 30s, maybe 40, carrying that quiet strength of someone who'd stared down loss and kept standing. Elmwood Lane was a short drive, a dead-end street lined with maple trees whose leaves rustled softly in the breeze, houses spaced just far enough apart for privacy. Number 14 was unassuming. Blue siding faded by years of Oregon weather, a porch adorned with hanging baskets of ferns and a swing that creaked faintly. I parked curbside, grabbed my toolkit, a heavy canvas bag clanking with pliers and voltage testers, and approached the door, knocking twice. It swung open quicker than I expected, and there she stood, Mira Kendrick, taller than I'd pictured, with dark hair swept into a loose ponytail that framed her face, stray wisps curling at her temples. Her hazel eyes held a mix of relief and caution, faint crow's feet etching stories of smiles and sorrows. She wore a simple gray sweater over jeans, the kind that hugged her figure without trying, exuding an effortless grace that made her age feel like an afterthought, late 30s perhaps, with the poise of someone who'd lived through storms I could only imagine. "You're from the wiring place?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with fatigue, like she'd been holding her breath all day. "Yeah, Harlan Voss," I introduced myself, stepping inside as she waved me through. The entryway enveloped me in warmth, a subtle blend of brewed coffee and lavender from a diffuser on a side table. The living room opened up to the left, bookshelves crammed with novels and trinkets, a leather couch worn soft from use, and a mantel crowded with framed photos. Mira and Tom on a beach, arms linked, his grin wide and hers radiant. The images hit like a quiet punch, reminding me of the emptiness that must echo through these walls now. "Kitchen straight ahead," she said, leading the way down a short hall lined with faded wallpaper. Her steps were deliberate, almost measured, as if inviting a stranger and disrupted some fragile balance. The kitchen was compact, sunlight slanting through a window over the sink, illuminating oak cabinets and a tiled counter scattered with mail and a half-full mug. She flicked the switch, and the overhead lights buzzed erratically, casting unsteady shadows. Started this morning. Tom always handled this stuff. I don't even know where to begin. I set my bag on the counter, pulling out my multimeter. Likely a loose wire or faulty connection. I'll check the fixture and panel. Shouldn't take long. As I climbed a stool to unscrew the light cover, dust motes dancing in the beam, I sensed her lingering in the doorway, arms crossed not in defense, but as if steadying herself. The silence stretched, broken only by the click of tools and the occasional creak of the house settling. "You new in town?" she ventured after a minute, her tone casual yet probing like she was testing the waters. "About a year," I replied, probing the wires with careful fingers. "Came from Portland for the job. Harlow's got that small-town feel. Peaceful, mostly." I glanced down, our eyes locking for a beat longer than necessary. There was a depth there, a quiet intensity that made my pulse skip. She nodded, a faint smile ghosting her lips. Peaceful can turn lonely quick, especially when you're used to sharing it. The words landed softly, heavy with implication, and I felt a twinge of something unfamiliar, empathy mixed with an unwelcome curiosity. I cleared my throat, focusing on tightening a connection. "I suppose it can. I'm still adjusting myself." The repair unfolded methodically, testing voltages, replacing a corroded switch, the faint hum of electricity underscoring our sparse exchanges. She shared snippets about her jewelry, how she'd turned grief into creation after Tom's passing, stringing beads late into the night to ward off the silence. "It's like piecing together fragments," she said, her voice softening as she watched me work. I nodded, sharing my own aspirations, breaking out on my own, maybe traveling someday. Electrical works puzzles. Find the fault, fix it, light returns. She chuckled lightly, the sound warming the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. If only everything mended that easily. With the lights steady and bright, I packed up, wiping my hands on a rag. "All good now? Call if it acts up again." But as I turned toward the door, she hesitated, her hand hovering near the counter. "Coffee, fresh pot. I owe you for coming so late." The offer hung there, polite yet laced with something more, her eyes meeting mine with a vulnerability that tugged at me. I checked the time. Dusk was settling outside, the streetlights flickering on along Elmwood Lane. "Sure, why not?" We sat at the scarred wooden table, steam rising from mugs, the kitchen clock ticking steadily. Conversation deepened. My family in Portland, the pressure of being the only kid with big expectations. At 23, the world's wide open, but it feels like a tightrope sometimes. She stirred her coffee, her gaze distant. Wide open can be terrifying. I was 36 when Tom went. Thought we had time. Now it's just recalibrating. The sun dipped fully, painting the room in amber hues. She revealed more. The suddenness of his heart attack, the void it left. One morning he's laughing over breakfast, the next, empty chair. Her eyes shimmered, but she held steady, and I listened, feeling inadequate yet compelled. "That sounds unbearable," I murmured, my hand inching closer on the table without thought. She reached out then, not quite touching, but the warmth bridged the gap. "It is, but we endure, or try to." As the evening wore on, she showed me her jewelry workbench in the corner of the living room, a clutter of beads, wires, and pliers under a desk lamp. I held a necklace, turquoise stones glinting. "This is stunning. You've got a gift." Her cheeks colored faintly. "Thanks, Harlan. It's rare to hear that these days." Standing to leave, the doorway framed her silhouette against the hall light. "If anything else breaks," she trailed off, her gaze holding mine, a silent question lingering. I nodded, a strange tightness in my chest. "I'll be here." Driving back to Willow Crest, the roads empty under a starless sky, I replayed it all, the flicker in her eyes, the almost touch, the weight of her stories. It was just a job. A cup of coffee. But something had stirred, unbidden and unsettling. This was only the beginning, but he still didn't know how quickly everything could spiral out of control. The rain started pattering against the windows a few days later, a steady drum that matched the restlessness building inside me. I'd tried to push thoughts of Mira aside, burying myself in work at Harbor Wiring Solutions, spending long hours installing new circuits in Oakwood Brew, that cozy cafe on Maple Avenue where the air always smelled of ground coffee and fresh pastries, the walls echoing with the chatter of locals nursing their morning brews. At 23, I was still piecing together my place in Harlow, Oregon, a town where the river curved lazily through the valley, and everyone seemed to have their lives neatly mapped out. My apartment on Birchwood Drive felt even smaller those days, the single lamp casting long shadows on the walls as I scrolled through my phone at night, half expecting a message that never came. But then it did, on that stormy Thursday evening, as I stood in my kitchenette warming up a frozen meal, the microwave humming indifferently. Mira's number flashed on the screen. Harlan. Sorry to call again, but the hallway light's completely dead now. Bulb change didn't help. If you're free... Her voice carried that same quiet weariness, laced with an apology that tugged at something deep in my chest. I glanced out at the downpour turning the streets into glistening ribbons under the sodium lights. No trouble. I'll be there in 20. Why did I drop everything so easily? The job was part of it, sure, but there was more. An unspoken curiosity about her world, that house on Elmwood Lane, with its hidden layers of memory and solitude. By the time I pulled up, the porch light sputtered weakly, rain sluicing off the roof in sheets. She opened the door swiftly, a towel in hand. You're drenched. Come in. Dry off. I shrugged off my jacket, hanging it on the coat rack by the entry, the familiar scent of lavender and wood polish welcoming me like an old friend. The living room glowed softly from the fireplace, flames licking at logs and casting flickering patterns on the bookshelves. Mira looked different tonight, her hair loose and tumbling over her shoulders, catching the firelight in soft waves. In her blue blouse and jeans, she moved with that effortless grace, the faint lines around her eyes speaking of a life fuller than mine, late 30s marked by experiences I could only guess at. Hallways this way, she said, guiding me through the narrow corridor, photos on the walls whispering stories of happier times, her and Tom at festivals, vacations frozen in laughter. I knelt by the fixture, toolkits splayed out on the floor, the rain's roar muffling the world outside. As I pried open the cover, testing wires with my multimeter, she stayed close, passing tools without a word, screwdriver, wire stripper, our fingers grazing once, sending a subtle spark through me that had nothing to do with electricity. You're thorough, she noted, leaning against the doorframe, her arms folded as if holding back a tide. Tom rushed everything, always said details were for later. I managed a smile, twisting a connection. Details save headaches down the line. Learned that the hard way on jobs. The silence between us thickened, broken by thunder rumbling overhead, the house groaning in response. She opened up then, about her day, packing orders for her jewelry, the satisfaction of creating something tangible amid the chaos. It's my anchor, really. Keeps the quiet from swallowing me whole. The fix was straightforward, a burned-out socket swapped in minutes, but as I stood, wiping my hands, the storm unleashed fully, wind howling like a trapped animal. Don't drive in this mess, she insisted, her eyes scanning the darkened window where rain blurred the view of the cul-de-sac. Stay for dinner, or? Stew's on, made too much as usual. I paused, the logical part of me screaming to leave, but her gaze held a quiet plea, vulnerability peeking through her composure. If you're sure. The kitchen enveloped us in warmth, the pot simmering on the stove with aromas of beef, carrots, and thyme that made my stomach rumble. We sat at the table, candlelight dancing as the power flickered once, twice, before steadying. Conversation eased in, my frustrations with the apprenticeship, feeling like I was always one step behind. Her reflections on building a life in Harlow, the town that had cradled her marriage and now her grief. "Age tricks you," she said, sipping wine she'd poured, a deep red that warmed from within. "You hit your late 30s, think you've got it figured, then loss rewrites the script." As plates emptied, the storm raged on, thunder cracking like judgments from above. We migrated to the living room, the fire's glow painting her features in soft oranges and shadows. She pulled out an old album from the shelf, pages crinkling as she turned them. Snapshots of hikes in the Cascades, her younger self beaming beside Tom. "We met when I was 25, full of plans. He grounded me. Now, at 38, it's like learning to walk again." Her voice wavered, and without thinking, I reached out, my hand covering hers on the album. "You're stronger than you know, Mira." She didn't withdraw. Instead, her fingers curled slightly around mine, the contact sending a quiet thrill through me. The age chasm yawned in my mind, she with her settled past, me fumbling into the future, but it only amplified the pull, that forbidden warmth. The evening deepened, wine loosening knots of reserve. I confessed my Portland breakup, how I'd felt immature, outmatched. "Maturity's not a number," she replied, her hand still in mine, thumb tracing a slow circle. "It's enduring the hits." Our eyes locked, the room shrinking to just us, the fire popping softly. I noticed details, the way her blouse shifted with her breath, the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the wood smoke. "Why stay tonight, Harlan?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "You could have gone." I swallowed, heart thudding. "Because this feels genuine, rare." She leaned closer, breath mingling with mine, the tension coiling like a spring. We talked until the storm ebbed to drips, sharing dreams deferred, her unspoken wish for Italy, mine for stability beyond wires and switches. As midnight approached, she offered the guest room. "Roads might flood," I agreed, pulse racing, following her upstairs where the air grew cooler, the stairs creaking under our weight. At the landing, she paused, turning to me. Her hand rose, brushing my cheek lightly, lingering. "Good night." The touch burned, electric and tender, leaving me breathless. In the guest bed, sheets cool against my skin, I lay awake, the house settling around me. What was this? She was a widow, worlds apart in experience. I was too young, too green for the complications. Yet, in the quiet of Elmwood Lane, something irreversible had begun to unfold. Everything is heading toward a finale you can't brush off. What she does now will leave a mark on him forever. The morning sun spilled through the guest room window, its soft light cutting through the haze of a restless night. I lay still for a moment, the unfamiliar ceiling of Mira's house on Elmwood Lane staring back at me, the events of the previous evening looping in my mind like a song I couldn't shake. At 23, I'd never felt so caught between exhilaration and unease, my heart a tangle of threads I didn't know how to unravel. The faint clatter of dishes drifted up from the kitchen, mingling with the rich scent of brewing coffee that seeped under the door. I dressed quickly, my clothes still carrying the faint dampness of last night's rain, and descended the stairs, each creak amplifying the quiet tension in my chest. Mira was at the stove, her back to me, stirring a pan of eggs with a practiced ease. Her hair was swept into a loose bun, a few dark strands curling against her neck, and she wore a simple white blouse that caught the morning light filtering through the window over the sink. At 38, she carried a beauty that wasn't loud but profound, etched in the subtle lines of her face, the way her movements held both grace and weight. She turned as I entered, her hazel eyes catching mine with a warmth tinged with hesitation, like she was recalibrating after last night's closeness. "Morning. Sleep all right?" Her voice was soft, but there was a flush to her cheeks, a crack in her usual composure. I nodded, sliding into a chair at the kitchen table, its scarred surface now familiar under my hands. "Yeah, thanks. That bed's comfier than my own." She smiled faintly, setting a plate before me, scrambled eggs, crisp bacon, toast with a smear of butter, and poured coffee into a mismatched ceramic mug. The kitchen glowed with morning light, dust motes dancing in the beams, the room alive with small details. A stack of jewelry catalogs on the counter, a vase of wilting daisies, a calendar pinned to the wall with dates circled in red ink for her boutique shipments. We ate in a tentative silence at first, the clink of forks and the distant chirp of sparrows outside filling the space. But the air held the weight of last night's touch, her hand on my cheek, the unspoken pull that had kept me here. "About last night," she began, setting her fork down, her gaze fixed on her plate before lifting to meet mine. "I shouldn't have asked you to stay. The storm was just convenient." Her honesty disarmed me, and I leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I'm glad you did. I wanted to be here." The words slipped out, raw and unguarded, and her eyes softened, a flicker of relief passing through them. Breakfast unfolded slowly, conversation weaving through safer topics. Her plans to ship a batch of necklaces to a client in Seattle, my upcoming job installing recessed lights in a renovated house on Cedar Street. But it kept circling back to the personal, like water finding cracks in stone. She spoke of the house, how its quiet had grown louder since Tom's death. "Sometimes I hear his laugh in the next room, then remember it's just the wind." I shared my own struggles, the pressure of being young in a town where everyone seemed settled. At my age, you're supposed to have a path, but I'm still stumbling. Her hand brushed mine as she reached for the coffee pot, and this time neither of us pulled away. Our fingers laced briefly, a quiet act that sent warmth curling through me. "This feels complicated," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her thumb grazing my knuckle. "You're so young, Harlan, with so much ahead. I'm not supposed to feel this." I tightened my grip, heart pounding. "And I'm not supposed to want this, but I do." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the space between us, the kitchen's warmth wrapping around us like a cocoon. The age gap loomed. She was a widow, her life shaped by loss and love I couldn't fathom. I was barely starting, my future a blank page. Yet, her touch grounded me, made the doubts feel smaller. We cleared the table together, a silent choreography, me rinsing plates, her drying them with a checkered towel, our shoulders brushing in the cramped space by the sink. Each contact sparked something, a current that hummed beneath the surface. As we finished, she leaned against the counter, her eyes searching mine. "What are we doing, Harlan?" The question hung heavy, and I stepped closer, the linoleum cool under my boots. "I don't know, but it's real. Isn't that enough?" She didn't answer, but her hand found my arm, fingers tracing the edge of my sleeve, her touch both hesitant and deliberate. The room felt smaller, the air thick with possibility. And I leaned in, our lips meeting in a kiss that was soft at first, exploratory, then deepening with a hunger that surprised us both. Her hands slid to my shoulders, pulling me closer, and I felt the years between us dissolve in the warmth of her breath, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against mine. It wasn't just desire, it was connection, raw and unguarded, like finding a language we both understood. We broke apart, breathless, her forehead resting against mine. "We can't do this," she murmured, but her arms stayed around me, contradicting her words. "People will judge. Your age, my past." I cupped her face, my thumb brushing her cheek where a tear had slipped free. "Let them." "This is ours." We spent the morning stealing moments, a kiss by the window as sunlight poured in, her laughter as I tripped over a rug in the living room, her head on my shoulder as we sat on the couch, the fire from last night now cold ashes. She opened up about her fears, being alone forever, the guilt of moving on after Tom. "He was my anchor, but you're something new." I confessed my own doubts, how every relationship before felt hollow. "With you, It's like I'm finally awake. Reality crept in, a text from work, my boss's name flashing on my phone, pulling me back to the day ahead. As I gathered my jacket, the weight of what we'd started settled heavily. "Will I see you again?" I asked, standing in the doorway, the porch swing creaking faintly behind me. She nodded, but her eyes held a shadow of doubt. "I want to, but we need to be careful, for both of us." I drove to work, the streets of Harlow blurring past, Maple Avenue's shops, the park where kids chased each other under the oaks. But my mind was back on Elmwood Lane, replaying her touch, her voice. Days turned into weeks, a fragile rhythm forming. I'd stop by after work, fixing small things, a dripping faucet in her bathroom, a wobbly shelf in her workshop, each task an excuse to linger. We'd cook together, simple meals like spaghetti with sauce from her garden, the kitchen filled with steam and laughter. One evening, on her porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in pinks and purples, she took my hand. "This scares me, Harlan. You're 23. You should be out chasing dreams, not here with me." I pulled her close, the air cool against our skin. "This is my dream, right now." But whispers began circling, my truck parked too long at her place, a co-worker's raised eyebrow, Mira's worry about neighbors' gossip. "I'm 38, a widow. What will they think?" she'd say, her voice tight. I'd hold her tighter, trying to silence the doubts. One night, tension boiled over. We sat by the fire, her head in her hands. "This can't last, Harlan. You're just beginning. I'd be selfish to keep you." I knelt before her, taking her hands. "You're not keeping me. I'm choosing this." The words hung between us, fierce and true. We made love that night, not in haste, but with a tenderness that felt like a vow. Her workshop's lamp casting soft shadows as beads scattered across the floor. Afterward, lying in her bed, her breath steady against my chest, I felt both anchored and adrift. The turning point came on an autumn day, the air crisp as we drove to a lakeside trail off Highway 42, a place she'd loved with Tom.